Narayanam namaskritya Naram chaiva narottamam Devim saraswatim vyasam Tato jayamudirayat Vedanti tattva vedas Tattvam yajnanam advayam Brahmeti Paramātmeti Bhagavān iti shabdyate Vadanti tattva vedas Tattvam yajnanam advayam Brahmeti Paramātmeti Bhagavān iti shabdyate. Learned transcendentalists who know the absolute truth call this non-dual substance Brahman, Paramātmā, or Bhagavān. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The absolute truth is both subject and object. And there's no qualitative difference there. Therefore, Brahman, Paramātmā, and Bhagavān are qualitatively one and the same. The same substance is realized as impersonal Brahman by the students of the Upaniṣads, as localized Paramātmā by the Hiraṇyagarbhas or the yogīs, and as Bhagavān by the devotees. In other words, Bhagavān, or the personality of Godhead, is the last word of the absolute truth. Paramātmā is the partial representation of the personality of Godhead, and impersonal Brahman is the glowing effulgence of the personality of Godhead, as the sun rays are to the sun God. Less intelligent students of either of the above schools sometimes argue in favor of their own respective realization, but those who are perfect seers of the absolute truth know well that the above three features of the one absolute truth are different perspective views seen from different angles of vision. Paragraph. As it is explained in the first sloka of the first chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, the supreme truth is self-sufficient, cognizant, and free from the illusion of relativity. In the relative world, the knower is different from the known. So this is now responding to the subject-object. In case you're wondering, what was that all about? Here it is. This is what it's all about. In the relative world, the knower, that's the subject, is different from the known, that's the object. But in the absolute truth, both the knower and the known are one and the same thing. In the relative world, the knower, that's the subject, is the living spirit or superior energy, whereas the known, that's the object, is inert matter or inferior energy. Therefore, there is a duality of inferior and superior energy, whereas in the absolute realm, both the knower and the known are of the same superior energy. There are three kinds of energies of the supreme energetic. There is no difference between the energy and the energetic, but there is a difference of quality of energies. The absolute realm and the living entities are of the same spiritual energy, superior energy, but The material world is inferior energy. The living being in contact with the inferior energy is illusioned, thinking he belongs to the inferior energy. Therefore, there is the sense of relativity in the material world. In the absolute, there is no such sense of difference between the knower and the known, and therefore everything there is absolute. The opening word, Vadanti, not Vedanti. Vedanti it refers to the Vedas or knowledge, and there's some similarity in sound. Vadanti, as they say, so more vak than vit. They say. Learned transcendentalists say. Important verse. Obviously important because it's right in these initial verses of the entire Srimad Bhagavatam. Reminder from yesterday, day before yesterday, whenever the other class. This section of Canto 1, Chapter 2 is a response. It's a response to the first of the 6 questions of the sages in Naimisaranya, to Sutta. Please summarize the essence of the whole range of the Vedas, please. Thank you very much. So he's doing that. And the whole range of the Vedas, taking this one verse, emphasizes this, or emphasizes that, or emphasizes the other. It's something like the blind man touching the body of the elephant. And you don't know what an elephant is, so you touch the ear, you touch the trunk, you touch the leg, you touch the torso. And that's what an elephant is. Similarly, those that aren't fully understanding the essence of the Vedas, it's this, that, or the other. And in the case of the other, if it's Bhagavan, the Bhagavan folks, those who have that sense of Bhagavan is the elephant, or the absolute truth, such Bhagavatas, they understand from the Bhagavatam at least, the Bhagavan feature is the ultimate, and from the ultimate comes the other features. They're relative to, connected to, but a partial manifestation of the absolute truth. So they're still in the category of absolute truth because they're Krishna's direct expansion is Paramātmā, a partial expansion, partial in the sense that Vishnu and Krishna are the same, but Vishnu doesn't have all the qualities of Krishna, so they're not the same. Same but not the same. Same in quality but not in quantity, in the fullness of Bhagavan. And then the Brahman, a celebrated aspect of the Supreme, is celebrated especially amongst those that understand the Brahman feature, the absolute truth feature, by negation. Not this, not this, not this. That is, form, qualities, pastimes. Features is not found in Brahman. And the Upaniṣads say it over and over. And those who are Brahmavadis, they take it in that way. Formless. The absolute truth is formless. Without going into it, that's very prevalent. So right at the very beginning, the Bhagavatam is announcing the absolute truth, the non-dual substance, the non-dual absolute truth has three features, and they're equally non-dual. Non-dual. So that's where the subject-object. Non-dual. In duality, there's a distinction between this and that. Now, the material distinction and the spiritual reality, there's the subject-object. The subject is not the object. The object is not the subject. But they're qualitatively absolute or of the same spiritual nature. In that sense, no difference, and non-dual. In this way, the living entity, the tiny jiva, can be identified as Brahman. Correctly so. An aspect of the qualitatively not different from, but the living entity is not the all-pervasive Brahman. So the spark is not the fire. The part is not the whole. And then what to speak of Paramātmā and Bhagavān feature. So it takes two things. It takes a highly refined capacity to distinguish this from that. That's intellect. Discriminating between this and that. Discerning the difference between this and that. It takes a highly refined intelligence to understand all this, because otherwise a less intelligent person throws their hands up in the air and says whatever they say, word jugglery, I don't get it, or something. But the principle is quite simple. Simple for the simple. Simple in the sense that there is a source of everything. And that source of everything has an unbroken eternal relationship with everything. Everything is connected to its source. And everything has its source. That source is the absolute truth. And everything else other than the source is relative to its source. Even these absolute features, Paramātmā and Bhagavān. Krishna is the source. And they're expansions, a personal, partial expansion, or an energetic expansion, spiritual energy expansion, or the material world, an inferior energy expansion. There's an intimate, non-dual relationship between the source and that which emanates from the source. Then it gets into distinctions. Well, the living entity is an expansion of that source, and it's all spiritual. It's a nice example. I like this nice example. Oil doesn't mix with water. You can shake it up and emulsification, but let it sit for a while, and the oil has separated from is separate, and even it's like little miniature drops of oil. It still doesn't mix with water. Doesn't mix with water, and leave it alone for a while, and then the oil gathers together with the oil, and it doesn't mix with water because they're different. Similarly, the living entity is like the oil that doesn't mix with the water. So while the living entity is in the water, and while the living entity is within the material energy, it doesn't become the material energy. The problem is misidentification with the material energy and thinking I'm the material energy, or different categories of, subcategories of those categories and so forth. That's me. And then there comes all the rest of material existence, varieties and positions and gradations. And then there's the absolute truth, where there's no difference between the living entity and the Supreme. Qualitatively. It's a nice philosophy. I mean, the Bhagavatam, it's not just philosophy, it's a nice explanation of reality. So the absolute nature, that's this verse. And I want to touch one more thing, and that is how Prabhupada begins the second paragraph. As it is explained in the first sloka of the first chapter of the Bhagavatam, the Supreme Truth is self-sufficient, cognizant, and free from the illusion of relativity. So let's go back to 111 Bhagavatam and see what 111 Bhagavatam says, or how it says what it says. Here's the introduction. More introduction. Here we go. It's a long verse. I'll just read the translation. Oh, my Lord, Sri Krishna, son of Vasudeva. Oh, all-pervading personality of Godhead, I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. I meditate upon Lord Sri Krishna because, here we go, he is the absolute truth and the primeval cause of all causes of the creation, sustenance, and destruction of the manifested universes. He is directly and indirectly conscious of all manifestations, and he is independent because there is no other cause beyond him. It is he only who first imparted the Vedic knowledge into the heart of Brahmaji, the original living being. By him, even the great sages and demigods are placed into illusion as one is bewildered by the illusory representation of water seen in fire, or land seen on water, land seen on water. Yeah. Only because of him do the material universes temporarily manifested by the reactions of the three modes of nature appear factual, although they are unreal. Therefore, I meditate upon him, Lord Sri Krishna, who is eternally existent in the transcendental abode, which is forever free from the illusory representations of the material world. I meditate upon him, for he is the absolute truth. What a nice translation. The Sanskrit of the first verse composed in the English language in such straightforward, simple, easy to, maybe not easy to understand, but easy to follow the message. It's very elegant. All honors to our founder Acharya who did all this. Of course, to Vyas and the subsequent acharyas that commented that Srila Prabhupada was relying upon. There are sections of the Bhagavatam where Srila Prabhupada, in giving his morning classes, would just read the extensive commentary of Sridhar Swami, just the Sanskrit, and then paraphrase it. So he, Prabhupada, did not independently conjure up the meanings of things. he has his realization, his direct line of knowledge and super soul connection with Krishna within. But he also relied very much upon the commentaries. And Sridhar Swami is one of his favorite, not the only, but one of his favorite. Especially where there's some passages where he didn't comment so much, but some places he did. Prabhupada liked very much. So the reference to this first verse is the supreme truth is self-sufficient, cognizant, and free from illusion of relativity. So self-sufficient, what is that? What's the implication? What's the meaning? He doesn't need. So those persons that are not self-sufficient, they have needs, and the needs are met by others. He is self-sufficient because he, Krishna, doesn't rely on anyone and anything else outside of himself. And in fact, he supplies necessities for everyone else. So he's self-sufficient, cognizant, and this is, the absolute word, free from the illusion of relativity. Then he goes into what's relativity, where the object and subject are different. The knower and the known are different, qualitatively. No, subjectively, the knower is not the known. But from an absolute perspective, the knower and the known are absolutely the same. Qualitatively, absolutely the same. But their position is different. Thus, the nomenclature, knower and known, subject, object. It's like devotional service. For devotional service, there has to be two, subject, object. The servitor and the served. It's very, very straightforward, just like a sentence. Subject, object, and then a verb. Maybe some adjectives, maybe some prepositions, maybe other parts of a sentence. But subject, object. Krishna is free from that relative, free from relativity. He's self-sufficient. He's not needing something to know something. He's all cognizant. Therefore, this other term, self-sufficient, cognizant, and free from relativity. Of the absolute, same as this verse. First verse, same as this verse, or this verse is the same as the first verse, just expanding on a certain point. The absolute nature of the absolute truth, the source of everything, and not dependent upon anything, but self-sufficient. And that includes these other features. I'm going to end. So the other features mentioned in this verse are the Brahman feature, the Paramātmā feature. They're dependent upon the independent supreme. Now, a Brahman realized person might not like to hear that. They probably would object. What? Brahman is dependent on Bhagavan? How so? Well, like light from its light source, or the all-pervasiveness feature is dependent upon that from which the all-pervasiveness feature is resting, upon which it's resting. So the Bhagavan, so they're not chronologically one's existing because the other is pre-existing, but it's not a chronological statement, it's an ontological statement. That is, Brahman is resting upon Bhagavan. We won't find Bhagavan without Brahman. We won't find Brahman without Bhagavan. They're inseparable. It's not chronological, but it's an ontological manifestation or statement. The Brahman feature is resting upon the Bhagavan feature. The Bhagavan feature includes. So one may have realization of the Bhagavan feature. One may have realization of the Brahman feature, yet have no proper understanding of the Bhagavan feature. But the converse is not true. One has a proper understanding of the Bhagavan feature. He has a proper understanding of the Brahman feature. And what the Bhagavan feature has, as the previous verses indicate, starting with verse number 6, the process of Vasudeva Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojataha, this gives one realization of all this. Then from that platform of devotional service to Vasudeva, then there's this realization and that realization and so forth. The rest of the Bhagavatam unfolds, or the rest of what is knowledge unfolds. Bhagavatam is such a nice literature. Literature about the Bhagavatam is such nice literature. Any comments or questions? You have something.
I'm trying to understand the use of the words duality and relativity and how Prabhupada uses it in different contexts. So towards the end of the purport, Prabhupada referred to the sense of relativity in the material world as how we perceive the inferior energy and superior energy.
How we perceive
inferior energy and superior energy. But my understanding is that could also be duality, because that's total opposite.
Well,
so how do we, what is the exact difference between duality and relativity, and how do we use it, aligning with what Srila Prabhupada said?
Duality, I like keeping things simple. Duality is not seeing the connection or connectivity with the source. So like, it's fall season. Summer's over, winter hasn't set in, so it's relatively this. It's not that, it's not the other. But the absolute truth is, where does summer, fall, winter, spring come from? And then, so that's not duality. That's relativity. Relativity, through Krishna's arrangements, the movements of the sun and so forth, comes the seasons. But it's, look at the big picture with the source of the big picture, then that's, at least it's one way that relativity can be used. Relative to what? Relative to the Absolute. And then the movements of the Absolute can generate a perception on our end of relatively this and relatively that. But look at the Absolute Truth, and it's part of the Absolute Truth. The absolute nature is embedded within everything. The relativity has to do with our perception of the totality, especially with recognition that there's a source from it, the source of it. Now, there are different ways of using English language. And there's different ways of using the Sanskrit language. So the source does that. This word can mean that so many things. That word can mean so many things. So, but how the use your question is, how did Prabhupada use these terms? I'm trying to respond to that question. More?
So on a practical terms, let's say, like I struggle with the various dualities, right? Happiness, sadness. So is this the right understanding that I could see it as also from the relativity perspective, because maybe from my perspective I'm not seeing the um, um, the original.
Well,
Because
from my perspective, it depends if I have material consciousness or spiritual consciousness.
because that's relativity, right? Because relativity is from the seer's perspective. Like how do
No,
we
that
as
your way of explaining is different than mine. I'm not saying. Let's go back to my way of explaining. Relative is there's a center. There's this and there's that. There's winter and summer season, and there's the center. So, relatively, yes, okay. Now, from the perceivers, okay. But if the perceiver doesn't see the source of everything, then there's no background. There's no frame of reference. Then it's duality. It's winter or it's summer. And it changes, okay. Time moves and it changes. But I'm not, there's subtle differences. And there's different ways of using language in this way, that way, the other way. There's subtle differences. So one can take this lens or that lens or another lens, and the language may mean different things in different places. So I'm giving a definition that at least for me works, but there may be another person over there that says, well, not exactly. Okay.
Because all along I thought to look at the relativity only with respect to time. Like Prabhupada explains how time is different.
Yes.
But this is the first time, at least my attention is going towards looking at the inferior and superior energy, and hence the confusion.
But the inferior superior energy requires the recognition of there's a source of both. But supposing one doesn't see the source of both, might makes right. I don't see the source, and there's might, and there's less might, and the strong dominate the weak.
There's 3 questions online by
Really?
Geetamala Mataji.
It's not 3 questions, it's just the question is, how do we not argue that Bhagavan is superior to Brahman? Because it says in the purport, less intelligent people argue in favor of one over the other. But how do we not argue that Bhagavan is superior to Brahman?
You're taking us into, my response is, you're taking us into the Achintya Beta Beta Tattva region. That is to say, there's an absoluteness in relation to all these 3 features. At the same time, there's There's a difference between each of these three features. The living entity is in the category of Brahman, but the living entity that's in the category of Brahman is not the all-pervasive Brahman. We're not all-pervasive. And then we're not the source of Brahman. Bhagavan is. So there's simultaneous, this is Lord Chaitanya's sublime teaching, oneness and difference. So my recommendation is don't get caught in failing to see the oneness and difference feature when you're looking at the question, at least the way I've understood what your question is, when you're looking at this distinction. One might emphasize the non-difference, one might emphasize the difference. And there's not, if this one's right, then that one can't be right, or it's wrong.
So you're saying let people gravitate towards whatever they...
No, I'm not saying that. Prabhupada is emphasizing one thing, and it doesn't mean the other is not true if this is true. The other one is false. There's non-difference between Brahman, Paramātmā, and Bhagavān. There's non-difference. That's the verse. And one might say, excuse me, but there is a difference. One is the basis and support of the other two. And then the other two have their distinctions also. There's differences between those two. Thus, they're different terms.
And why would we not argue about that?
Well, if you're, people will argue about anything, but if you want to be a follower of Lord Chaitanya, you have to be able to take this statement and look at that statement and not see a contradiction because of the simultaneous oneness and difference. It's not that language applies to any old topic that you want to talk about, but in this particular topic, the Absolute Truth has its oneness feature, the Absolute Truth has its difference feature. Otherwise, there's, these three. There's difference. This means this, that means that, the other means the other. There's difference. But
you wouldn't argue that qualitative one.
Could you stop fiddling with you adjust the volume, and I lose her voice. Could you keep it steady? Thanks. Okay. Could you say it again one more time, the last?
So you're saying you would not argue that they're all qualitatively one?
They're qualitatively one. At the same time, there's a distinction between the verse is saying qualitative oneness. The verse is saying qualitative oneness. They're of the same spiritual nature. But then there's variegatedness there's diversity amongst the unity. But that diversity is not a material diversity, it's a spiritual diversity. And Krishna has the right to be diverse. and he manifests himself in diverse ways, but they're the same absolute nature. It's a sublime understanding. So this verse is emphasizing a particular aspect, the non-difference aspect. But one more time, implicit is there's three things, so there's a difference. So you can look at through this lens or that lens. Oneness, difference, simultaneously. Next question. You said you had 3 questions. You done?
No, it wasn't 3 questions. I was just putting the same question in 3 different paragraphs.
Okay. Anyone else? Srila Prabhupada ki jai.